Hi everyone. So for my TLG sharing idea, I am doing it on multilingual collaborative work, specifically in content areas. And this is found on page 62 in the TLG book. So on the left-hand side, this is the book's definition of the strategy, and over on the right here, this would be my definition. So it's that collaborative tasks can use multiple languages while working in the content areas. Different steps of an activity can have a set language plan to use, or translanguaging can be encouraged throughout the entire activity. So I'm sure we all know what collaborative work is. We've heard it hundreds of times in our education classes, how important it is for students to be working in pairs or groups. And in this strategy, we're looking specifically at the content areas, so math, science, social studies, all of the different subjects. And this strategy is saying that when students are working collaboratively in these content areas, they should be using multiple languages throughout the same task or assignment. A lot of times in bilingual schools or bilingual programs, there is a set language for each subject or a set language for the time of day. For example, in math, they are being taught in only Spanish and they're expected to communicate and do all their work in only Spanish. So this strategy is saying they should be using multiple languages basically all throughout the day. So this is how to implement for a collaborative task in the content area. So these are some examples of things you can do. Some are just quick assignments in the different content areas. So the first one would be to discuss in any language and then afterwards share out in English. And my low is in Spanish, so that's what I'm going to be using throughout my presentation. So an example of this would be students are asked to do a turn and talk or like a think, pair, share to a classmate and discuss in either English or Spanish what they already know about the Industrial Revolution. Afterwards, students will share their ideas out to the class in primarily English. If they need to use some Spanish, that would be acceptable. And this down here is in the student's home language of Spanish. It's set directions for how the turn and talk should look. Another thing you can mention is while giving the directions about the turn and talk, you can mention that afterwards they will be sharing out in English. That way they can ask their partner for certain words if they need to know them and kind of prepare for what they're going to share in English. A second example would be to brainstorm in any language that they choose and write in English. So this can be done by, in a review science lesson, students brainstorm together 5 different landforms that they have learned in both Spanish and English. And afterwards, students would collaboratively fill in this graphic organizer by writing their answers in English. And a third example would be to preview in the home language of Spanish and then collaborate in any language. This strategy is very similar to the preview, view, review strategy in the TLG guide also, if any of you have read that yet. So basically, to preview content by showing students this video in Spanish about how to find the perimeter of a rectangle. So this video right here is solely in Spanish, which would be the student's home language. And then afterwards, students collaborate to measure reality by discussing it in either Spanish or English. So first, students would be, learning the material in their home language to really make sure that they comprehend what they're going to be doing and learning. And then afterwards, they can work together. They'll most likely be using the academic content language that they learned in the video, so that part would be in Spanish, but maybe other communication would be in English that they're doing during that activity. These are some examples of how to incorporate this strategy for presentations in the content areas, so kind of a step further than just brief little tasks or assignments. So one would be to research and plan in any language of their choice, and then present in English. So this would maybe be used more in the secondary or high school level. But students can research about an ecosystem, and the students can use Spanish videos, books, and websites to find their information. And I have like a sample here of if students were doing it on a frog's ecosystem. So there's a few different books on that in their home language, but there's also a website here in English if they choose to do that, and a worksheet of a note sheet, like while they're researching, that's in their home language as well. And then afterwards, students would work together and present this information in English to the class. And one last example would be to present in one language and analyze in another. So students complete a Venn diagram comparing and contrasting their partner's home culture in Spanish and share it with the class. So students can work together to fill out some graphic organizer. This is comparing and contrasting their language or their culture to their partners. And then afterwards, when they're sharing this with the class, the whole class can analyze this in English. So they can compare it to their own culture or compare the partners and share their ideas in English with the class. These are just some few other important tips to remember. So you need to be very strategic with the grouping and the pairs that you make for this collaborative strategy. So in groups, make sure there are at least 2 EBs with the same home language. In the one preview example that I shared, if you are grouping students all with the same home language, you can show the video in whatever language their L1 is. And if you have a group of, let's say, 4 students, make sure that maybe 2 of them have Spanish as their native language and 2 of them have English as their native language. That way they at least have one other person that they can fully communicate with that will understand them. If you have a group with 3 English speakers, native speakers, and 1 Spanish native speaker, they're most likely going to have to use English for the whole assignment. And in partners, it's ideal for EBs to have different language proficiencies and strengths, so that way they can really learn off of each other, and the strengths that one partner have might be the weakness of another, and that way they can learn from each other. And a few more ideas that I didn't include examples of would be to listen in English and discuss in any language, so either Spanish or English, and negotiate content in any language and then share out in English. And yes, that's my presentation. Thanks for listening.